These will be most frequently in the west. It'll be windy across Northern Ireland, especially around the coasts. Outbreaks of showery rain are likely, mainly in the west, with some sunny spells possible in the east. So more persistent rain is likely in the southeast later, while the showers tend to ease elsewhere along with the wind, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. Today we'll be discussing the economy here in Great Britain. What do you hope to see the Chancellor Rishi Sunak invest in his spring statement? Conservative MP Peter Bone joins me to discuss the Electoral Commission for scrap, reform, keep. It's going to be a busy one, but first it's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's 2 p.m. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. At least 35 people have been killed and 134 wounded in a Russian airstrike on a large Ukrainian military base near Poland in what appears to be the most westerly attack so far. The regional governor says more than 30 missiles were fired at the facility, which is located less than 15 miles from the Polish border. The base is the site of joint drills with NATO, and foreign military instructors have previously worked there. It's not known if any were present at the time of the attack. The Pope has issued his strongest condemnation yet of the invasion of Ukraine, saying the unacceptable armed aggression must stop. Speaking to thousands of people in St. Peter's Square for his Sunday blessing, Pope Francis also said that the killing of children and unarmed civilians was barbaric.
With grief in my heart, I join my voice to that of the common people who implore an end to the war. In the name of God, let the cries of those who suffer be heard, and let the bombings and attacks cease. Let there be a real and decisive move towards negotiation, and let the humanitarian corridors be made effective and safe. In the name of God, I ask you, stop this massacre.
His Holiness the Pope. A Russian delegate involved in peace talks with Ukrainian officials says significant progress has been made in the latest round of discussions. The delegates said they thought both sides could soon arrive at a joint position. A member of the Ukrainian delegation has also said he thinks there could be results in the coming days. It's not known what any agreement might include. Ukraine has previously said it's willing to negotiate, but that it will not surrender or accept any ultimatums. Nearly 125,000 people have now been evacuated via humanitarian corridors from conflict zones in Ukraine. That's according to President Zelensky speaking in his latest video address. The president stressed that the key task is still Mariupol, where more than 400,000 people remain trapped. A humanitarian supply convoy bringing food and medical supplies is around 50 miles away from the besieged port city. The government is offering £350 a month to anyone who opens up their home to Ukrainian refugees for at least 6 months rent-free. Under the new Homes for Ukraine scheme, those offering accommodation will be vetted and applicants will face security checks. The programme, which will be rolled out this week, allows individuals, charities and community groups to bring people escaping the war to safety. That's even if they have no ties to the UK. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove said that he was considering welcoming a family into his own home. He also said the government would look at housing refugees in the homes of sanctioned oligarchs.
I want to explore an option which would allow us to use the homes and properties of sanctioned individuals for as long as they are sanctioned for humanitarian and other purposes. There's quite a high legal bar to cross. And we're not talking about permanent confiscation, but we are saying you're sanctioned, you're supporting Putin, this home is here, you have no right to use or profit from it.
Michael Gove. Meanwhile, the Chancellor has urged British businesses to think very carefully about any investments in Russia that would support President Putin's regime. Rishi Sunak has welcomed moves by companies such as BP and Shell, who have already pledged to move away from holding assets in the country. He also argues there's no case for new investment in Russia.
While I recognise that it may be challenging to wind down existing investments, I believe there is no argument for new investment in the Russian economy. I am urging asset owners and managers to think very carefully about any investments that would in any sense support Putin and his regime. As the Prime Minister has said, diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily, this hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Chancellor of the Exchequer there ending this bulletin. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
You're with Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up on the show. Is it time to increase the spending for our troops? Do we need to invest more money in our defence? The UK spent 2.3% of GDP on defence in 2021, according to NATO figures, compared with 3.5% by the United States. We currently spend 40 billion quid a year on defence, and I'm asking, is that enough? Today on Scrap Reform Keep, I'll be joined by the Conservative MP Peter Bone. We'll be discussing whether or not the Electoral Commission, my good friends, is fit for purpose. And on our Campus Clash today, we'll get two students on the show to discuss whether or not our Western values are worth defending. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts though. Would you like to see the UK spend more on our defence? Tweet me at GB News or email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Cheers very much. Now, the former US ambassador to the UK, Woody Johnson, said something that was considered to be quite controversial at the time. He warned Prime Minister Theresa May that there would need to be trade-offs as the British government divvies out spending across things like health, education, transport, with defence and security. And I'm afraid, folks, we're seeing with crystal clarity what getting that balance wrong looks like, and how right the warning from our American cousins was, you cannot have prosperity unless you have security. And you cannot have security if you prioritise spending on all other areas but defence. We all want better hospitals, better schools, better social care, better pensions and better transport. But we'll not have access to any of that, folks, if we allow our nation to continue to dwindle away its share of GDP spent on security. President Trump was best known in Europe for his robust stance on the need for for all of us actually, to stump up our bit to spend more on defence. And his warning on national security grounds that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline connecting Russia to Germany was a stupid move. He even sent former Chancellor Angela Merkel a mini white flag to highlight what he deemed to be an act of economic surrender in the binding of Europe's hands economically to Putin's energy supply. It was wrong to assume America can keep the world safe on its own. Europe now has to play its part. It beggars belief, folks, but it wasn't even a couple of months back that our nation, leading the world in preparing Ukraine for this invasion, didn't request permission to fly through German airspace to deliver weaponry to Kiev for fear of the Germans saying, "No." Now the whole of Europe is waking up to the threat of Russian boots on their continent's grounds. The Australians, recognising that President Xi of China is watching intently of how the West allows Putin to get away with what it's doing in Kyiv, licking his lips at the prospect of marching into Taiwan in a similar territorial land grab. And then who else will they attack? You know, prosperity is utterly worthless, I repeat that, folks, if we're unable to defend it. So our Aussie cousins are increasing their spending on its armed forces by a third. We could start by protecting our NHS, by preventing the abuse of taxpayer money that's wasted on a growing middle tier of NHS whackery and wokery over spending on doctors and nurses. It's reported that the NHS is spending 60 grand hiring equality and inclusion managers, as well as ditching our net stupid energy policies in favour of one that marries security of our supply, keeping our economy's lights on, and taking into consideration the realities of geopolitics. We also need to snap the Treasury from this view it's held for many years now. It's been a view that in 2010 led to a plan to cut the defence budget, reducing our fighting force by about a third. A view that saw the kind of invasion we're seeing in Ukraine as an anachronistic relic of the past. How naive, folks. How foolish we've been. We know that we cannot borrow more. There isn't a payday lender we can use to top up the nation's current account. Like many of you out there watching the show right now, times are tough and are getting tougher. I dread opening energy bills, and I know that's the same for many up and down the country. Even our Treasury is feeling the pinch. So we have to make tough decisions on spending now. As the Americans reevaluate their turn to Asia to head off the Chinese threat, we have to recognise here at home that in order to play our part, we'll have to be honest about the tough choices required. But what I will say, folks, is my God, how wrong those commentators were on our own shows, who said post-Brexit Blighty would be diminished as a nation, unable to totter about on the world stage without the Brussels conglomerate holding a hand. Who do the Ukrainians credit with their military success thus far? It's Britain. Who signed a deal to share nuclear submarine technology with Australia? Britain. Who's potentially joining the economic might of the CPTPP trading bloc, a Pacific trading bloc? Britain. We, folks, are doing pretty well here. We might be small in size, but as usual, punch way above our weight. But folks, in order for that to continue, we need to get real on spending more to protect the prosperity that pays for that healthcare, education, social care, universal credit, education, and much else. And one more thing, folks. It's reported that Ukrainian soldiers say, "God save the Queen," as they fire these NLAW anti-tank launchers, which are made in Northern Ireland. If we want to continue seeing our monarch and our flag stand for freedom and liberty, we need to spend to defend. What do you think, folks? Is it time to spend more on defence? The Times 212. Now, one way we could potentially save money as a country would be to look at the way we fund pensions. The Department for Work and Pensions puts the total cost of the state pension last year at almost £105 billion. That's a whopping figure. This is almost £70 billion more than in the year 2010, when the triple lock was actually introduced. We've been to Hull to see if people there think we should scrap the triple lock.
Keep it with inflation.
For me, I don't think it would worry me too much, because like I say, I've got these two other pensions coming in and I happen to be saving, and this is the most extraordinary thing about it all. But I think when people just rely on the state pension, I do think that that is a bit unfair, or it's very unfair actually.
It all depends on how much money the government's got to pay you. No, really, that's what it comes down to. They're going to have to get the money from somewhere. So
people need to be protected in their old age. So my background is healthcare, and I was a student nurse, kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, and we had a lot of old people being admitted and dying of hypothermia. They just sat there and froze to death, and that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen in society today. So I think the pensions is one of the greatest social inventions, that's not the right word, but we need to look after people and that's the way we do it in our culture. In other cultures, they take their old people into the house and look after them that way, whereas here we don't, so we need to look after them in another way. So the pension has to keep up with inflation, and so I don't think anybody should take anything away from pensions.
GB News reporter Anna Riley there, gathering the thoughts of people in Hull about whether or not we should scrap the triple lock. Sticking with the pensions, triple lock, my Culture Raw guests are going to debate if we should scrap it altogether too. So joining me is Rebecca O'Connor, the head of pensions and savings at Interactive Investor, and Danielle Boxall, media campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Rebecca, we'll go to you first. Do you want to see the triple lock protected?
I absolutely want to see it protected. It's there for a reason. Older people can't just go out and earn more money. They depend on their living standards rising in line with the rest of us. And that only happens if you're dependent on the state pension, if that state pension is rising. It was designed so that the state pension rises either in line with earnings or inflation. So what we all with in line with 2.5%. So it's very well thought through actually, and it's sort of there to protect the state pension and the millions of state pensioners that rely on it and don't have other private pensions coming in, and it's saving them from poverty.
Rebecca, before we go to Danielle, what would you say to those young people who might be watching this that say, well, I don't know when I'm going to see my pension, and I certainly don't know if I'm going to have property at that point of actually retiring, especially if they live in London. Do you think there is an element of intergenerational inequality?
Well, it's certainly been pitched that way, but actually, younger people now are going to be older people one day too. So in protecting the triple lock, we're actually protecting their income one day. And yes, we have auto-enrolment and defined contribution pensions in the workplace now, and that's great. But in the round, that's probably not going to be enough to say that we don't need the state pension anymore. It would actually take people a huge amount of extra contributions now to generate anything like the state pension in the future. The defined contribution levels that we're seeing now are actually only useful for supplementing the state pension. So it's there for future generations too. It's not an intergenerational problem.
Danielle, you're listening to that. You're going to be old once. Do you not actually want to protect the triple lock so you can guarantee yourself a canny pension?
Well, yeah, I do think that we should protect the triple lock, but I think what we should do is reform it so that it is fairer in the long term. I mean, obviously, at the moment, we're seeing a lot of demands on the government spending, and it's really sort of difficult to decide how the government is going to use that money. But I think in the longer term, what we should do is, as Rebecca mentioned, we have this 2.5% lock, as well as the inflation and earnings. I think what we should do is get rid of that and make it a 0% lock, so that in future, if inflation and earnings are actually negative, pensioners will still be protected, but it won't see that their earnings are sort of arbitrarily increasing, whilst other people, whilst working taxpayers, are seeing their incomes decrease. So I think that would be the best way going forward to make the triple lock a bit fairer and more sustainable in the longer term. Because, of course, this has only been around since 2010. So this is quite a new policy, really.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think
Rebecca,
going ahead, that would be a better way of making it more sustainable for future generations.
On that point then, Rebecca, do you think that actually, because as Danielle rightly says, a lot of working age people are seeing a real terms pay cut, do you think actually that would be one way of making the pensions triple lock fairer?
I don't think. I think we need to steer away from this either being, a benefit to younger people versus older people. I don't think it necessarily needs to follow. I think reform of the state pension triple lock is, we've seen this year, probably a good idea to some extent. Smoothing of the way that inflation is calculated for the purposes of the state pension triple lock, for instance, or it's actually based on the previous September's inflation figures, and now we're seeing the problem is that inflation is obviously rising astronomically, but the state pension is only going to go up by 3.1%. So some way of smoothing those measures so that the triple lock rises appear fairer. And of course, that's not to say we can't reform working age benefits too, but we don't have to take from older people in order to give to working age people. I think that's what we need to get away from feeling.
Yeah, Danielle, you rightly mentioned the different spending priorities that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is going to have to think about ahead of next week. Do you actually think that the triple lock will make it past 2024? Surely a Conservative Party which relies on the votes of our older generations ain't going to do anything to the triple lock.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting debate that's going on at the moment. And as you mentioned before, we need to spend to defend. So, we've got to think about where we can save so that we can spend. And the triple lock is one area that we could think about that. And, as Rebecca mentioned, there are lots of other pensioner benefits that aren't means tested, that mean that older people, get quite a good deal in some areas. In London, all over 60s have free transport. A lot of people are still working when they're 60. So is that really fair? That's, one area that we could look at changing. Another area is that, we're all getting older, living longer. So why can't we, increase the state pension age sooner? So it's due to go up to 68 by 2046, which is a very long time. Long way ahead. Why can't we reduce that so that it's increased to 68 by 2028? There are lots of areas that we can tweak policies to make them more cost effective and produce savings that we can spend in other areas.
Rebecca, what's your view then, just to end? Do you think actually the triple lock will be protected going beyond 2024?
Well, it's been suspended for a year, so the question is, will we see it come back after this year? And that is, it does look doubtful, although it was a promise. I agree that, the state pension age is under review, so perhaps that is something to look at. But actually, longevity isn't going up, so maybe, that's also slightly unfair. I think perhaps the state pension isn't where we should be looking to get our defence spending from, although there are changes, across the board that we can make. I don't think we should be impoverishing old people when we're thinking about how we're going to increase spending on defence.
Yeah, interesting thoughts there from the two of you. Of course, we're all living longer, so the pension bill is going to get bigger and bigger. Interesting thoughts. Rebecca O'Connor and Danielle Boxall, thank you very much for your time. Still to come, folks. Next, we'll be looking ahead to what we could possibly see from the Chancellor Rishi Sunak's spring statement on the 23rd of March. But first, let's have a little look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for many, but there'll be some showers here and there. Let's take a look at the details. Heavy showers from the afternoon will ease in southwest England, leaving a largely dry picture and clear skies. A few mist and fog patches may form later in the evening. Skies will be cloudier in parts of the southeast with a few outbreaks of rain in the east. This rain will gradually clear through the night. Showers will begin to ease across Wales this evening. A few mist patches are possible under clear spells. It will turn chilly tonight with a rural frost too. Clearer skies will form across the Midlands. Fog patches will also form in some prone spots, particularly in the countryside. It'll be a dry evening across northern England. Strong winds will begin to ease, allowing temperatures to fall away. A cloudier picture across Scotland with a few showers remaining this evening. After a windy day, winds will gradually ease a little bit overnight and it should turn largely dry later. However, it will stay windy across Northern Ireland, with showers still spreading into western areas overnight. Showers will be heavy at times, perhaps with the odd rumble of thunder as well. Tomorrow, most places will stay dry overnight with clear skies. This will give a patchy frost in the southwest and parts of Scotland, and that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone we learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, I make absolutely no bones about it. When we get the spring statement from the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, later this month, I think we ought to see increases to our defence spending. But how do we actually go about building a stronger and more resilient armed forces in Great Britain? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the Conservative MP for Reilly Wickford, Mark Francois. He joins me now. Mark, thanks for your company. Seeing what's going on in Europe right now, do you reckon that this is a real wake-up call and you're saying, how hey, folks, smell the coffee and spend more on defence?
Yes, Darren, I do. My father, Reginald Francois, was a D-Day veteran. Very proud of that. So I've always agreed with that old maxim, defence is the first duty of government. So I serve on the House of Commons Defence Committee. We've been saying for quite a while, for some years now, that we should spend about 3% of our gross domestic product on defence. At the moment, we spend about 2.3. Our unofficial motto, if you like, was 3 to keep us free. So, yes, I do believe, and so do my fellow members on the committee, it's an all-party committee, that defence spending should rise.
Yeah, what do you think, where are areas where the Chancellor could actually find a little bit of leeway in I don't want you to sort of take out the Treasury's spend and review right now, but where are areas where you reckon, because we read stories, Mark, all the time about things that the NHS are doing, spending money on diversity and inclusion managers, and taxpayers are rightly thinking they're taking the mick slightly.
Well, look, the first thing we need to do is look to our own within defence itself. So the first question we have to ask is, the money we're already allocating to defence, is that well spent? And I regret to tell you the answer in many cases is no. The All-Party Public Accounts Committee, which I also serve on, concluded last November, their words, that the UK's defence procurement system is, I quote, broken. Of the 36 biggest defence procurement programmes in the Ministry of Defence, not a single one, not one, is running on track in terms of both time and budget. So the first thing we have to do, before we try and take money from any other department or ask for a tax rise, is to make sure that we're spending the MOD's budget effectively.
Yeah.
The system, I'm afraid, is broken. I don't mean to worry your viewers, but that's the brutal truth. So the first thing we've got to do is to completely review how we buy our military equipment and fix that system. So if you like, we get more bang for the buck. We've got to get that right. And then if we do put more money into defence, hopefully we will get more bang for the buck for that too. But the MOD needs to look, to take the plank out of its own eye, Darren.
Mark, as you well know, in 2010 there were, of course, those cuts to the size of the armed forces. Do you now look back at that and think, God, the Cameron government was naive in the extreme to think that what we're seeing in Ukraine wouldn't happen in the modern warfare age?
Well, I'm one of those who's always been rather hawkish about Russia. But, Darren, let's be honest, in 2010, when that government came into office, Gordon Brown had almost bankrupted the country. So there had to be some very painful choices. It was just financially inevitable. Where I think we've gone wrong is we've continued, for instance, a process of reducing the size of the British Army. We had something a year ago called the Integrated Review, which wanted to reduce the British Army from 82,000 regulars to 73,000. Some of us on the Defence Committee at the time said that was pretty daft. Well, now to do that in light of Ukraine would be completely bonkers. So the first thing we've got to do is to reverse that cut completely. Look, if we're dealing with Vladimir Putin and the people around him, these are mainly ex-Soviet KGB or GRU intelligence officers. These are not softies. These are ruthless people. And they're running a government and an army that is prepared to shell civilians randomly, which is why we had that tragedy in Mariupol recently, where they struck a maternity hospital. You're not going to deter people like that just with slogans. And sanctions are helpful. They are necessary, but not sufficient. What will deter Putin and his acolytes is military strength. And that means having an armed forces in the UK and in NATO, which is fit to fight tonight, as the saying has it, not in a few years' time. So the other thing we should do is we should look at the readiness of all our armed forces, and where there are deficiencies, and there are, and the Russians know full well what there are, I'm not giving anything away, we should put those deficiencies right as a matter of urgency. That is the best deterrent that we have to persuade Putin not to try his luck and move on into the Baltic states or Poland, which would trigger an Article 5 guarantee in NATO and lead to a wider war. You deter people by persuading them that you are strong and willing to fight. So we need to spend our defence pounds very, very carefully in order to get the maximum deterrent value. Because remember, Darren, the aim of armed forces is to prevent by persuading any potential aggressor, in this case Putin, they couldn't possibly win. If you actually get to war, you've half failed in a sense, because your deterrence didn't work the way it should do. So to come back to where you came in, this is a brutal wake-up call for the whole of NATO, including the United Kingdom, and we ignore it at our peril.
Mark, I really hope you don't mind, but we've had some breaking news, so I'm going to ask you. We're talking about stability and international security. We've had sad news today that the US photojournalist Brent Renaud has been killed. What's your reaction to that? Is this is just escalating in a really, really awful way?
Well, that's a tragedy. There's sometimes tension between politicians and journalists, Darren, as you know. But this is in a completely different field. Here's a journalist, I'm afraid I never met the gentleman, but, you know, who literally put his life on the line to report to those back in the Free West what is going on. And if he's been killed effectively in the line of duty, that is a tragedy. And my heart goes out to his family and his colleagues. But it just drives home, I'm afraid, in a very brutal way, how dangerous this situation is, and reinforces the fact that we have to understand how brutal a regime we're dealing with, and we have to plan accordingly. But that's a tragic loss if a journalist has been killed reporting from the front line.
Yeah, Mark, I couldn't agree with you more. That's Mark Francois. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for joining me on Real Britain. You're with GB News on telly, DAB and online. Next, we'll be paying a visit to our Scrap Reform or Keep feature. Today, we're looking at my friends in the Electoral Commission. But now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Darren. It's 2:34. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. At least 35 people have been killed and 134 wounded in a Russian airstrike on a large Ukrainian military base near Poland in what appears to be the most westerly attack so far. The regional governor says more than 30 missiles were fired at the facility, which is located less than 15 miles from the Polish border. The base is the site of joint drills with NATO, and foreign military instructors have previously worked at the facility. It's not known if any were there at the time of the attack. The Pope has issued his strongest condemnation yet of the invasion of Ukraine, saying the unacceptable armed aggression must stop. Speaking to thousands of people in St. Peter's Square for his Sunday blessing, Pope Francis also said that the killing of children and unarmed civilians was barbaric. A Russian delegate involved in peace talks with Ukrainian officials says significant progress has been made in the latest round of discussions. The delegate said that they thought both sides could soon arrive at a, quote, joint position. A member of the Ukrainian delegation has also said he thinks there could be results in the coming days. It's not known what any agreement might include. Ukraine has previously said it's willing to negotiate, but it will not surrender or accept any ultimatums. Nearly 125,000 people have now been evacuated via humanitarian corridors from conflict zones in Ukraine. That's according to President Zelensky, speaking in his latest video address. The president stressed that the key task is still Mariupol, where more than 400,000 people remain trapped. A humanitarian supply convoy bringing food and medical supplies is around 50 miles away from the besieged port city. The government is offering £350 a month to anyone who opens up their home to Ukrainian refugees for at least 6 months rent-free. Under the new Homes for Ukraine scheme, those offering accommodation will be vetted and applicants will face security checks. The programme will allow refugees with no ties to the UK to enter and is expected to launch this week. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Real Britain with Darren Grimes will be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, folks. It's now time for Grime Watch, one place where we can all have our say on what's going on in the world is social media. So during Grime Watch, we'll hear what you at home have been saying about news stories this week. It's hard now not to see a headline about the rise in cost of living, energy bills, the weekly shop prices at the pump, and monthly phone contracts are all going up. On Facebook, I asked the question, do the Conservatives still think now is the time for their tax increases? And Leslie said they are not Conservative at all. The national insurance hike needs stopping and the VAT on fuel. Rob said that the government are to blame due to the mismanagement of our energy. The Tories have had power for 12 years, but still blame Labour for getting it wrong. We should have had more nuclear power on stream by now if they were competent. And Susan said, and what are the pensioners supposed to do? Their pensions cut and prices going up. It's going to feel like being locked down again. But this time we'll be shivering because we can't afford the cost. Karen says the government has an obsession with handing out taxpayers' money to foreign countries whilst hammering British citizens. It can't continue. And Dean puts it simply and says Conservatives and the Labour Party equally unelectable. Patricia says, I live in a rural area and rely on oil for heating. Really important point from Patricia here, by the way. Just before Christmas, 500 litres cost 300 quid. Today it's gone up to 1,051. Thankfully, I still have oil, but many in the village are now unable to top up due to the scandalous cost. That is a really important point here, and I think we forget about rural communities too much, too easily. Another topic I put to you online was about helping causes closer to home. I posted, in this country, we have a healthcare crisis, a social care crisis, an energy crisis, a housing crisis, not enough teachers and not enough of much else too. Whilst I do agree we ought to help Ukrainians, what are we doing for Brits here that are desperate for help? Liz commented saying we need to seriously sort out our infrastructure. More housing is a priority. Liz, I couldn't agree with you more. Lynn said, we're heading for a deep recession, but unless the government does something now to stop our cost of living increases, there will be much hardship for the public. I don't see how causing a global recession will help Ukraine. Paul says, charity always should begin at home. We cannot afford to help the world. Lorraine commented, this country is on its knees, but we can give millions in foreign aid just like that. And Isabel said, our crisis pale into insignificance compared to Ukraine. We are safe. We are not being slaughtered and bombed. Now, folks, really important comments there from all of you. Please do continue getting involved. Another story I clocked this week is that the privileged Pratts, frankly, in Extinction Rebellion, they announced that they're planning a new wave of protests that they hope will cause maximum non-violent disruption at UK oil refineries next month. I can think, folks, of no clearer an indication that this extreme green movement is one that is fundamentally anti-human. How could it not be when it seeks to disrupt energy producers at a time when the average cost for energy in this country is hitting 4,000 quid a year and our energy security is in peril? The modern day green movement, to me, folks, is at its core anti-human. If you think of human beings as being nought more than a blemish on the natural environment, of course you're going to want to roll back the progress humans have made. They won't be happy, folks, until we're all crawling around in loincloths and living in caves. And I haven't got my summer body ready. They're extremists and ought to be treated as such, if you ask me. Now that's all we have time for Grime Watch today. But it's now time, it's 2:43 and time for scrap. I've got me healthy prompts here. Scrap, reform and keep. Now today's subject, some of you might know if you are friends of the show, a bugbear of mine, the Electoral Commission. And Peter Bone is the Conservative MP for Wellingborough and he joins me now. Peter, absolutely fantastic to be with you. First of all, Peter, could you just break down for us in layman terms what actually the Electoral Commission is and why it was brought about?
Well, the Electoral Commission is supposed to be the referee to make sure elections are fair in this country. And we can all support, I mean, if it's a fair electoral commission, if it's doing things that are not biased, then that's great. But unfortunately, this Electoral Commission, when it came to Brexit and the referendum, was politically biased. It was, in fact, institutionally biased. And it used the worst state power and abuse it could against the Brexiteers, and 4 people in particular who were the responsible person for Leave campaigns, including yourself, Darren. And I've never seen in my time in political office of the state abusing its position. And the one thing I can say is the Electoral Commission cannot be kept. It's either got to be scrapped or huge reforms take place.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting there that the incoming, or who is now the chairman, chief exec, basically had to issue an apology. But Peter, does this tell us something about the wider civil service? I mean, you look at Claire Bassett, who presided failure after failure as chief executive and then was moved into another plum public sector job. Is this just the culture in the civil service? Do we get rewards for failure?
I think it's somewhat deeper than that. I think it was the establishment. The establishment was so opposed to Brexit, they couldn't believe anybody in their right sense would vote for Brexit. And then when it happened in the referendum, they set about trying to stop it happening. And when, of course, Parliament was taken over by Remainers with the Speaker, John Bercow, allowing it to happen, the Electoral Commission went after the Brexit, the main Brexit groups, whether it's Grassroots Out, Vote, Leave, Believe, or Better for the Country. And they thought that was a way of stopping Brexit actually happening. But thankfully, Boris Johnson came along, we got Brexit done. But it still does not forgive the Electoral Commission, for instead of being the referee, they put on one of the team's shirts and played for them. And that's not acceptable. So they've either got to be scrapped entirely or reformed fundamentally. Now, I accept that we have a new chairman of the Electoral Commission. He's apologised to people who, and we've got a new chief executive's coming, and most of the commissioners have gone. But I still think that culture's there. So I'd like to see at least the powers of the Electoral Commission split between 2 different organisations. So they can't be investigators. They can't be the judge, jury and executioner. That is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, because, I mean, Peter, as you well know, the Electoral Commission, and you are one of the staunchest critics within the House of Commons, but the Electoral Commission was actually asking for prosecution powers right? So it really could be judge, jury and executioner. Now, I know for a fact that had I been at the point in 2016 that I found myself in, with the Electoral Commission being the ultimate arbiter of the final outcome, because it was, thank God, Peter, that the police got their hands on it eventually, and they were really quite good and sorted the whole thing out and said, there's nothing to see here, move on, folks. But had the Electoral Commission had the final say, I dread to think, Peter, I really, really do.
Well, I mean, you all know, and only people who went through this know, the power that they used against people, the amount of cost that people had to defend, the absurd suggestions, the view that you were guilty, you couldn't possibly be innocent, and then there was this huge conspiracy, all of what was fundamentally wrong. And I know this affected the mental health of people. I know it affected people's careers and background. It should never have happened, because the four responsible people they went after in those organisations were the most upstanding and decent people of the highest integrity. And the Electoral Commission should never be allowed to forget that they failed us on that front. Now, thankfully, we do have the police and we do have our courts, which are completely free of political bias. But could not be said about the Electoral Commission. And I'm very doubtful whether they can change on their own. And I think what's got to happen is their powers have got to be reduced and they've got to be split. So you can't have just one organisation deciding everything.
Yeah, Peter, just really briefly, what could be an alternative to the Electoral Commission? What, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, the Electoral Commission has got to be something that whatever political party you're in, or whatever your view, because don't forget this Brexit, you know, you had Labour, you had Conservatives, you had UKIP, you had people of no political party working together, and this Electoral Commission ganged up against them. So first of all, you've got to have something that people believe in. So that goes down to the personnel and who you choose. But then why not split it so that the functions to do with running the elections and making sure the electoral process works is done by the Commission, and then a separate organisation, completely independent of them, rather like the CPS, if you like, in relation to the police, decides whether there is an offence. Because I don't think you can leave it up to the Electoral Commission to investigate and decide that this person should have a huge fine. I just don't think that's fair or right. And you've got to have a system that everybody, whatever their political views, thinks it's fair. And I don't think we have that at the moment.
Yeah, so Peter, you're sort of hovering in between these two, aren't you? Which one do you think you'll ultimately go with?
You know what? I'm going to give the Electoral Commission a chance, and I'm going to see if they can reform. But in the end, I bet it's scrap.
Thank you. That's your opinion there, Peter, displayed in no uncertain terms. Now, we've had some breaking news. I don't know if you saw my discussion with Marc Francois in the last segment there, but we've learned, Peter, and I hope you don't mind me asking you about this, but we've learned that the US photojournalist Brent Renaud has been shot and killed in Irpin by Russian forces. I mean, Peter, these journalists are out there risking their lives to actually document for us here in the West what's going on in Ukraine. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts and prayers initially, of course, are with his family and friends, and it's a terrible personal tragedy. But of course, there's lots of journalists risking their lives out there, because if we didn't have them there, we really wouldn't know what's going on, because the first casualty of war, of course, is always the truth. So you do need to have people out there telling us what's going on so that we can make better decisions and hopefully find a way to end this dreadful war and get Putin and his forces back into Russia. But it brings home, doesn't it, just the risks that people are putting themselves at to bring us the news.
Yeah, do you think that this will actually force a reaction from the United States?
Well, I've been a little disappointed with the way the United States have acted. I think Boris and our government and the European states have been much more willing to take on Russia. And I fear the fact that the Americans are sort of giving the impression of holding back and saying what they won't do. You know, they won't support a no-fly zone. is not the way to defeat the Russians. I'm afraid that's the way to encourage them. So, I mean, if anything good comes out of this dreadful incident, if it makes the Americans more resolved to stand up to Russia, that would be good.
Well, Peter Bone MP, thank you very much for your time there today. Now, we're going to close the show with a campus clash. Today we'll debate whether our Western values are worth defending. I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by Beth Donnelly, a film music student at Leeds, and Ella Carmichael, politics student and former intern in the House of Commons. 30 seconds each, folks. Beth, can I start with you, please? Should we defend our values?
I think the problem with the term Western values is that there's a kind of confusion around exactly what they are, and how can we defend values that have become misconstrued and unclear. When people that are in charge of the so-called free world flaunt their political misjudgments and immoral private lives to the public, it's no wonder that people start to wonder what exactly these Western values actually are.
Well, what would you say Western values are?
Well, if you ask me what Western values are, I would say that freedom of speech, and certain civil liberties, that everyone is allowed just for the point of being a human being. And I think that when you have people in charge that tend to don't answer for their immoral actions, that's when we start to misconstrue what we call Western values.
Well, Ella, what Beth says there sounds pretty good to me. They sound like the kind of values that I wanted to defend, don't you?
Yeah, I think that Beth definitely makes some good points, but I think that the fundamental point is that defending Western values doesn't necessarily equate with attacking other values and other cultures. I think that there has been definitely, as Beth said, things can certainly be misconstrued, but I don't necessarily think that we should be ashamed of values that are and can be so positive. So we have some very positive premises, so such as promoting kind of liberal democracy, freedom of speech, tolerance and equality. I think these are things which can be so beneficial and really do have some positive premises. I think that Western values as a whole shouldn't be attacked just because a minority can sometimes represent them negatively or misconstrue them. So I definitely think that Western values should be defended.
Yeah, Beth, I mean, there's always going to be a few bad apples that, ruin everything for everyone else. But ultimately, we see what's happening in Ukraine. We see the way in which that they want to actually lean toward the West. And we in the United Kingdom are standing up to try and help them. Aren't you proud of that, Beth?
Absolutely. And Ella makes a lot of good points in that, yes, there are some really positive attributes to our Western values, and I'm by no means saying that we should just scrap them entirely. I think the point from where I'm coming from is that you have to be clear on what they are, and your leaders have to really represent your leaders just of the two main Western influences in power, like the US and the UK. They have to represent your core Western values. And with referring to what's going on in the Ukraine at the minute, Ella's right. There's a big difference between defending them, and then there's also a big difference between projecting them too. Right.
Yeah. Well, folks, we're going to have to continue this debate another time. That's Beth Donnelly and Ella Carmichael. Thank you very much for your time. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers as ever for your company. The show's on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. But for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for many, but there'll be some showers here and there. Let's take a look at the details. Heavy showers from the afternoon will ease in southwest England, leaving a largely dry picture and clear skies. A few mist and fog patches may form later in the evening. Skies will be cloudier in parts of the southeast with a few outbreaks of rain in the east. This rain will gradually clear through the night. Showers will begin to ease across Wales this evening. A few mist patches are possible under clear spells. It will turn chilly tonight with a rural frost too. Clearer skies will form across the Midlands. Fog patches will also form in some prone spots, particularly in the countryside. It'll be a dry evening across northern England. Strong winds will begin to ease, allowing temperatures to fall away. A cloudier picture across Scotland with a few showers remaining this evening. After a windy day, winds will gradually ease a little bit overnight and it should turn largely dry later. However, it will stay windy across Northern Ireland, with showers still spreading into western areas overnight. Showers will be heavy at times, perhaps with the odd rumble of thunder as well. Tomorrow, most places will stay dry overnight with clear skies. This will give a patchy frost in the southwest and parts of Scotland, and that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
Right here.